Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever seen a world championship live? Well, I'm here to deliver a world championship live right to your screen from 11 years ago. In 2014, one of the most competitive years for Carlsen after he beat up Anand in 2013 in the world championship, Anand won 2014 candidates and demanded a rematch. And Game 6 was known as one of the most popular games of both their lifetimes. So we're going to be looking at this amazing game. We have e4, so we have Carlsen is white, e4, c5. We have a normal opening. We have d4, Smith Mora, and a6. So this means that Anand is going for a knight or setup, and we go, which is in this line, where black attempts to play b5 if bishop to c4 is played, and after bishop to b3, bishop to b7 develops the bishop with excruciating, amazing diagonal attacking powers. So, Magnus Carlsen, as a grandmaster, obviously wouldn't blunder this, so instead we have c4, and Magnus transitions into a Marquise bind structure, which is this structure. White wants to put his it's a pretty simple setup. White wants to put his knight behind the c4 pawn, put the bishop on either f4 or e3, usually e3, sometimes f3, and bishop to e2, though that is not really common. We have knight to f6, regular moves, knight to c3, defending the pawn, bishop to b5. Now Anand is threatening to win the pawn through a pin. We have, I can't draw, neither can you. Queen to d3. I don't really know why he didn't play bishop to d2. Yeah, I guess so. Never mind. I do know why he played bishop to d2. f3 is an interesting idea here. The point is that now you can play bishop to d2, or you don't. It doesn't really matter what move order, but you're gonna put your bishops out. And the idea is that in the Najdorf, black is extremely weak on the dark squares. As you can see here, most of his pawns are on the light squares. In fact, six out of the remaining seven, are on the light squares, which means that Anand's dark squares are extremely weak. They're like Swiss cheese. So, using this concept, Magnus doesn't really have to worry about his light squared bishop. So he should focus on infiltrating Anand's weak dark squares. I can't speak. Neither can you. Usually d6 is a heavy target, which is achieved by knight to b5, which a6 stops the Najdorf, or knight to f5, which e6 stops. So, knowing that this can't happen, Magnus's plan should be to capitalize on the other weaknesses. For example, making this light squared blockade, which completely renders this bishop inactive. So I'm just going to remove all these for a second. Let's just imagine this position right here. So all these weak dark squares can be exploited easily if, number one, what we did right now, the Marquise bind also creates this nice light squared pawn chain. And combined with black's dark squared pawn chain, he locks in his bishop. Black's light squared blockade. He blocks in our bishop. We take our bishop with it, but this bishop here isn't. It might spend a move to go back, but that will be useless. So the whole purpose of this bishop is to take on c3, or in worst case, play like queen to a5, or maybe just leave the bishop there. And our bishop now has the opportunity to take all these dark squared diagonals, with our queen potentially coming to a4, making this a huge help. So we have Queen to d3 instead. I don't approve of this move. We have knight to c6, knight takes c6. Oh yeah, I don't, because you usually shouldn't be moving your queen in the early opening stage, so I would just recommend the calm f3. Instead we have queen to d3, knight to f6, takes, and now basically what's going to happen is that Magnus Carlsen is going to use his endgame abilities, finesse, and destroy Anand. We have queen takes d8, king takes d8, e5. So now Magnus is going to try to push through to Black's king. This isn't really a winning or a losing endgame. It's actually more subtle, because what White's going to do is that he's going to try to break out in a subtle. I don't know what I said. So Black right now is completely locked in. So that means his rook is going to have troubles getting out. So Magnus is going to take the initiative, what we call attacking your opponent and forcing them backwards, and try to capitalize on Anand's stuck position. So we have this in action. Now bishop to f4. Magnus can spare a move once in a while. He is now happy to give away this. He's creating structural weaknesses in the form of a doubled isolated pawns. But he now has the bishop pair and is going to absolutely destroy Anand and forces all his pieces backward. And this is a perfect time, since Anand wants to avoid castling into a pin. For example, he's completely stuck. So let's say he plays like b5, takes, and now, not now, let's just say c takes. And now there's castles, and Anand has the hassle of dealing with this pin. So rather than doing that, he immediately avoids the pin. h4. This is an interesting prophylactic move. His idea is that, look where Anand's pieces are centered. They're mainly centered on the queen side because the rook is stuck. And Anand wants to get the rook out via knight to b6, bishop to... There are a few plans. I'm just going to take away all these blue squares. He can do it via knight to c5, b6, and bishop to b7. He can do it by knight to b6, bishop to e7. And there's no other plan unless you're willing to play f6, which is an interesting move, may I say, because you lose 2 pawns. Well, we have b6, so we are going with this plan, h5. And what Magnus is going to do is that he's going to target this weak king side where his rook is staring down this file. So while Anand is preparing himself on the queen side, Magnus is going to go full out on the king side pawns. So we have castles, getting the rook into play, because Carlsen obviously has to keep slight proximity and authority on the queen side, but his main play is going to be on the king side. He's going to move his rook down this file. We have c5, and now it's taken about 3 moves but to activate his bishop, but now Anand will have to deal with this stuck knight, and Magnus Carlsen can easily deal with this bishop. We have rook to g3, rook a to g8. Now bishop to d3. Look at these active bishops. And Anand's bishop really isn't doing anything. It can't move to any useful square along this diagonal except c6, which I'm not sure you're going to do anything with, or a8. So we have knight to f8. Anand decides to deal with this problem as soon as he can. But the problem is that by going to f8, he really has no future. He's just going to go back probably. Or he's going to play h6, which is really risky because he's going to let his a pawn play in all this pressure. So he decides. So Magnus just plays a chill waiting move to avoid any g5. It's a prophylactic move, and g6. So turns out that Anand is willing to sacrifice this pawn. Not really sacrifice because there's here, but he's willing to risk his pawn to relieve the tension. So he's Magnus is gonna capitalize on this. I don't think rook to h5 was personally that good. I would rather play something like rook to h5. It's much better than rook to h5. So we have bishop to c6 and bishop to c2, covering any infiltration of Anand's bishop. King to b7, and now Anand literally is tied up. He can't do anything. If he moves his knight to capture, he will lose a lot of material because he just lost a knight. Wait, why can't you just... Okay, I don't know what I was doing. But he can't move because if he moves his rook, he just deactivates his rook. This rook wouldn't make sense because now this becomes a pin. Moving his bishop also counts as a waiting move, so don't think that's different. And by moving his king to b7, I don't get why he didn't move it to e7, because here you have a plan, potentially, of moving your king over here. He's just waiting, essentially. I wouldn't recommend this. Actually, king to e7 is much better. For example, if we play what happened in the game, rook to g4. Now, he can actually attempt to do something. So let's imagine just waiting moves, bishop to d1. Now, f6 is not good, but it is a plan to do something. It's not good because actually white has the advantage here, but I would recommend for most people to play like this. You're diverting your opponent's attention off, like you're diverting your opponent's, pressure. If they capture here, they fall into a drawn endgame. You might need to know your endgames a bit, but this is drawn because these pawns are really weak. This doesn't work immediately, but you get my point. These pawns are really weak, so you can just target them, and you can stop this with an easy 2-on-1. So instead, Anand for some reason plays the more passive, ugly king to b7. We have rook to g4, bishop to d1. Basically, Magnus is saying, look, you can't do anything, so I am literally going to wait until you run out of any waiting moves, which means he's forcing... you can't really run out of waiting moves, but he's waiting for Anand to break up. But now, Magnus absolutely blunders for some reason. He just blunders this pawn. Because if you capture here, there's now this would check, and you can win a pawn. Or you can just check here. You can win material. But for some reason, he decides to... Anand misses this and plays a4. So they both miss this for some reason. a4 is another blunder. King to e2. This is not another blunder, actually. And so Magnus is like, okay, I'm done waiting, buddy. I just realized you're not going to run out of waiting moves, so I am going to walk my king over to the king's side and do something. Unlike your king, who's on b7. So Anand's like, okay, do whatever you want. I don't care. So he continues. Now plays f3, blocking this bishop's view. But really nothing crucial is happening in this position. It's pretty drawn. Until we have rook to d8, king to b1. And then it's like, okay, I'm taking the file, and there is no way you're winning this. Carlsen's like, okay, chill. Let's see what you can do. He brings his bishops back, and he is now targeting these diagonals. Oh, yeah, also, if you capture here, this is not good, because actually, you might think this is nice, but now bishop to a4, and your king is pretty stuck. It is going to not survive, likely. So, seeing this, Carlsen decides, okay, now I can take. Well, not really now. He plays this nice tactic. The point is that if you capture here, you can just recapture. I know it's a really nice tactic. I just didn't see the rook for some reason. Okay, whatever. Bishop to e4 check. Carlsen is now going to engulf Anand's king with this check and force him back. And you're like, how in the world can Magnus win this? I just gave you spoilers. I don't know why. So, bishop to e4, bishop to c6, and now, actually, if you play bishop to a4, there is no threat because this no longer comes with a threat check. And the bishop there doesn't do anything at all. We have rook takes e6, and it turns out that Anand loses all his pawns. Literally, he loses 4 of his pawns. And with this check, Magnus is just going to queen. And so, I would say this is the deciding game. Anand probably got morally defeated at this point, and Magnus won up 2 points. He won 6.5 to 4.5 at the end. So, thank you for viewership. Like and subscribe. See you later. Sub something something. I don't know. And get out of here.